And welcome to the second video on the blood-brain barrier. And in this video, I'm going to be talking about the clinical significance of the blood-brain barrier. There is no way you talk about structures and anatomy that you don't want to talk about their clinical significance. Very important. How can we relate these structures to the clinical scenario? How can we relate it clinically? And when you're talking about the blood-brain barrier, one very important clinical significance of the blood-brain barrier is blood-brain barrier breakdown. Blood-brain barrier breakdown. You can have a condition where this barrier, that is the blood-brain barrier, breaks down. And this can be as a result of trauma, it can be as a result of stroke, tumors, infections, some other clinical conditions also that can affect the functioning of the blood-brain barrier, breaking it down either anatomically or functionally. The structural makeup of the blood-brain barrier can be affected, and also the function can also be affected. It can be compromised when the blood-brain barrier is allowing those compounds that are not supposed to cross over from the blood into the brain. It is allowing this compound to cross because the functional aspect of the blood-brain barrier has been compromised. Then we have some disease conditions that can be associated with blood-brain barrier damage. One is meningitis. Meningitis is inflammation of the meninges. I've talked about it before. And this inflammation can cause an increased permeability of the blood-brain barrier. And when there's increased permeability of the blood-brain barrier, structures, compounds, molecules can easily cross from the blood into the brain. Even those that are toxic to the brain can also cross because the functional aspect of the blood-brain barrier has been compromised. So compound can easily cross from the blood into the brain. Then we have multiple sclerosis. Multiple sclerosis, that's a condition in which the immune cell crosses the blood-brain barrier abnormally. You have high amount of immune cell crossing the blood-brain barrier. And when this gets into the brain, they affect the functioning of the brain. That's multiple sclerosis. Then we have Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease has to do with neuronal breakdown of neurons, leading to loss of memory. And this is also complicated in blood-brain barrier dysfunction. That is, blood-brain barrier dysfunction contributes to this pathology. It contributes to Alzheimer's disease. When we have breakdown of blood-brain barrier, a lot of compounds, a lot of molecules can cross to the brain. Those compounds that are toxic, and this will affect the neurons, affect the nervous makeup of the brain, leading to destruction of some of these structures. And when these structures are destroyed or affected, then it can be complicated, leading to Alzheimer's disease. Because some of these structures that are involved with memory, maybe short-term and long-term memory, can be affected. And when they are affected, it will automatically affect memory. And this will lead to Alzheimer's disease. So blood-brain barrier dysfunction can contribute to Alzheimer's disease pathology. Then one other thing that we have is drug delivery challenge. It's very hard for drugs to get to the brain because of their inability to cross the blood-brain barrier. Now I've said it, not all molecules, not all compound can easily cross the blood-brain barrier and get to the brain. And this also affects drugs. Most of the drugs that the body uses, most of these drugs, the molecules of these drugs find it difficult to cross the blood-brain barrier because large molecules, penetration of large molecules from the blood into the brain is prevented by the blood-brain barrier. And most of these drugs, they are large molecules. So it's very difficult for these drugs to cross over from the blood to the brain. Now, what are the strategies that are put in place to help and facilitate the easier movement of these drug compounds, these drug molecules from the blood into the brain? We have lipid-soluble drugs. Since the blood-brain barrier is permeable to lipid-soluble compounds, so if these drugs are made lipid-soluble, it will make it easier for the drugs to cross from the blood into the brain. So lipid-soluble drugs is one strategy to facilitate easier transport of drugs or drug molecules, drug compounds from the blood into the brain. Then use of nanoparticles, the use of intrathecal administration, that is administering drug directly into either into the spinal cord or into the brain. This is where they can do that. Maybe they make use of the lentivirus, the AAV. These are ways to bypass the blood-brain barrier so that we can make it easier for drugs to go from the blood into the brain. Because there are some drugs that are specifically for the brain. But if the drug is not even able to cross the blood-brain barrier, then how would the drug be able to perform its function where it's supposed to perform its work? So these strategies like lipid-soluble drugs, nanoparticles, and intrathecal administration help to facilitate easier transport of drugs that cannot easily cross the blood-brain barrier. But by using these strategies, the blood are able to cross the blood-brain barrier and get into the brain. Now, role in toxicology. The role of the blood-brain barrier in toxicology in environmental toxicants is that it prevents and protects the brain against harmful substances. However, in some cases, some toxins may still penetrate, like heavy metals, like a cadmium, the lead, and the likes. Those ones can still look for a way to transport themselves from the blood into the brain. But most of the toxic compounds are blocked by the blood-brain barrier. And in doing this, it protects the brain against harmful substances because we don't want all compounds that are found in the blood to easily get access to the brain, because the brain is the control center of the human body. So there should be selected entry of what can pass through. Just like the president of a country, not everybody can have access to it. That's the same way the blood-brain barrier works. It restricts access to the brain. It restricts access to the brain. It restricts access to the brain. Now, let's look at factors that affect the blood-brain barrier permeability. There are some factors that can affect the permeability of the blood-brain barrier. Age. Yes. Let's talk a little bit about the development of the blood-brain barrier. The blood-brain barrier, an early function of the blood-brain barrier development, or early feature, let me say, an early feature of the blood-brain barrier development is the formation of tight junction. And in humans, let's say around 14 week, yes, the brain of a fetus at around 14 week, it expresses occludin and claudin 5 in the capillary endothelium. Now, this blood-brain barrier, it develops and matures during fetal life, but it's only after birth that it is well formed. Yes, that is, even at birth, the blood-brain barrier has not fully developed. Yes, it has not fully developed, but after birth, that's when the blood-brain barrier becomes well formed. So factors that can affect blood-brain barrier permeability is age. That is, the blood-brain barrier is immature in unit, hypertension, inflammation, radiation, and trauma. These are the factors that can affect blood-brain barrier permeability. Age, hypertension, inflammation, radiation, and trauma. Now, let's look at the difference. What are the differences between the blood-brain barrier and the blood CSF barrier? We have the blood-brain barrier and we also have the blood CSF barrier. I'm going to make a video on the blood CSF barrier. But let's look at the differences between the blood-brain barrier and the blood CSF barrier. The first one is the location. The location of these barriers. The blood-brain barrier is located at the brain capillaries. So it's located at the brain capillaries, while the blood CSF barrier is located at the choroid plexus. the choroid plexus that's involved with the production of CSF in the ventricles. Then what are the main cells that make up these barriers? For the blood-brain barrier, the main cells that make up the blood-brain barrier is the endothelial cells. The endothelial cells makes up the main cells of the blood-brain barrier. While the blood CSF barrier, for the blood CSF barrier, the main cells that make up the blood CSF barrier are the ependymal cells. The ependymal cells are the ones that make up the main cells of the blood CSF barrier. Now, tight junctions are both found in the blood-brain barrier and also in the blood CSF barrier. The presence of tight junction in the blood-brain barrier and also presence of tight junctions in the blood CSF barrier. Then what are the function? Another difference is the function. The function of the blood-brain barrier is to protect the brain tissue. Why? The function of the blood CSF barrier is to regulate CSF composition. Is regulate the composition of compounds, molecules in the cerebrospinal fluid. One is to protect the brain, for that is the blood-brain barrier, and the blood CSF barrier is to regulate CSF composition. And last but not the least, I always like to give you simple mnemonics on how to remember things in anatomy, because mnemonics make it easier for you to recall things you read in anatomy. Now, for blood-brain barrier, the simple mnemonics you can use is safe brain. Safe brain. And this mnemonic combines both the components of the blood-brain barrier and also some function, the function of the blood-brain barrier. Now, for safe brain, S stands for selective transport. The A stands for astrocyte. F stands for filters toxins. E stands for endothelium, that is the tight junctions. The B from brain stands for basement membrane. The R in the brain stands for regulate ions. The A stands for amino acid transport. The I stands for immune protection, and the N stands for nutrient control. You can see that these mnemonics combine both function and the structures that make up the anatomical components of the blood-brain barrier. Safe brain. Selective transport, astrocyte, filters toxin, endothelium, basement membrane, regulate ions, amino acid transport, and immune nutrient production. Thank you very much for watching the video. You can do well to like and subscribe. And drop your questions in the comment section. I'll go through them and answer them in my next video. See you in the next one.